Everybody, and welcome to this second episode of Altitude, our new live stream series. I'm your host, Ady Dolan. I've been an air traffic controller for the last 21 years, working for NATS at Heathrow Tower. It's a really exciting place to work. There's always something going on, and the view's not that bad either. I'm sure that one day I'll get the hang of it. If you missed our first episode, it was a really interesting one about space-based ADSB, or satellite navigation, to you and me, across the Atlantic. Really interesting stuff. It's not Die Hard 2, but it is a great Christmas watch, and it is available now on the NATS YouTube channel, so please go and check it out. For any first-time viewers, Altitude is designed to give you a behind-the-scenes look at ATC, all of the exciting technologies and new procedures that we're developing, and importantly, the people that work within it. A reminder that there'll be time for Q&A at the end, so if you've got a burning question, please just pop it in the text box and we'll try and get to it at the end of the show. For the second episode, I'm very excited to have with me today Ady Taylor, who, as well as being a former controller himself, is now NATS Chief Solutions Officer for Digital Towers. Hello, Ady.
Hi, how you doing?
Pretty good. So we're going to talk to Ady about the rise in recent years of the Digital Control Tower, the introduction of the Digital Tower Laboratory at Heathrow, and the work that Ady and his team have been doing there, and whether COVID has dampened the enthusiasm for digital towers from airports all around the world. We're also thrilled to have with us a very special guest from across the water. Last time we had Vinny Capizzuto over the Atlantic in Washington, DC, working for Aerion. And this time, it's just a short hop across the Irish Sea to the Executive Vice President of Searidge Technologies, and another person with a wealth of ATC experience, Neil Bowles. Hello, Neil, how are you?
Hello, Ady. Very well, thank you.
Neil, let's kick things off with you. Before we get into the work that Searidge does and has done for a long time, tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up working with Searidge.
Okay, well, yeah, I started like everybody on this call. Actually, I started off working with NATS as a trainee controller way back in 1997. I worked in ATC ops, flow control, things like that in NATS for a while. And then I went out to Dubai for a few years to work in ATC down there, and really started to get involved in new technologies, and was introduced to Searidge. And we did a little bit of work with Searidge at DXB. And, you know, they were basically looking for, you know, they were growing and they were looking for some sort of ATM expertise to join the company. So I joined them 5 years ago. So I left Dubai, which was nice and sunny, went to Ottawa in January, which was about -20. Nice. So a little bit of shock. So I did there for about 4 years, and I'm now back working remotely in Northern Ireland, but still with Searidge.
Okay, so before we dive into the detail, in layman's terms, that is in language that a Geordie can understand, what is a digital tower?
Basically, it's a way of safely and efficiently controlling air traffic in an aerodrome. But it's obviously, instead of sitting in a control tower, traditional tower looking out the window, we're using video sensors and cameras to bring those out the window views to controllers. But also we're then able to augment those views a little bit. We're able to add some additional views. So anything that looks distant from a control tower, distant threshold, for example, we can bring those views a little bit closer. So it's more than just replacing an out the window view, but effectively it's a digitization of the aerodrome control service.
All right. Before we develop that a bit further, can you give us a bit of a summary as to where Searidge is currently working at the moment?
Well, we're based in Canada, and we have some digital tower systems in operation and in development with NAV Canada. We're working with NATS at Heathrow. We have the world's busiest airport that's certified with the digital tower service at Budapest, with Hungaro Control, which is mainly used as a contingency system. And we also have systems across Europe, the Middle East, and a very, very large one in Singapore that Andy's very familiar with the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore.
Okay, well, let's jump across to Ady then. So Ady, you're someone with loads of experience in ATC. You've worked at some really busy units. You've also worked at Gatwick. What were your thoughts of when you first heard of the idea as an ATCO sitting there and someone says the words digital tower, what did you think?
So a nice dig that we get between the two towers at Heathrow and Gatwick. I see there, Ady. So, yeah, I mean, Gatwick was a great springboard for me from ATC operations into digital towers, and so for me, the kind of introduction to digital towers was probably taken the same way as a lot of people do, assuming that it's something for small airfields and to enable air traffic services to be done remotely, maybe where there is no ATC or otherwise it's just difficult to provide. But it didn't take very long really before coming into the whole use case for a wider range of things, as Neil's kind of touched on. And I think actually part of that came specifically because I started working closer with Searidge, and then as Nat's actually invested in Searidge Technologies itself because of the clear potential that there is for our own operations and the operations that we support around the world. It's actually grown to have a much better understanding, and actually I think there are use cases developing continuously on this front. So I think today is going to be a good discussion around that kind of what you really can use these for, and it's not just about doing small airfields remotely.
Yeah, I remember when we first started talking about them, and it would always seem to be, the remote Scandinavian airfields with, supply flights every now and then. It was quite niche and it was a bit out there, but over the years, it's really become a genuine part of the ATC landscape, and it's really growing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is, pre-COVID, that was definitely being driven by the fact that airports were coming under pressure, expansions, developments, and effectively that impacts the air traffic control facilities that are present, either because they need to be moved because of development, or the new developments go outside of their area of reach. So, like Neil mentioned earlier, the ability to actually bring distant parts or new parts of airfields, new runways, new terminals into clear view, and to provide the controllers with the information that they need live, just becomes a really powerful case for developing these kind of systems, and certainly something that you can then continue to develop and build as an airport changes. So that's kind of been a big driver. That's certainly the lead in for places like London Heathrow, and similarly in Singapore, where we were looking at busy operations already with dual runways, multiple terminals, and with a need and a clear direction to expand to additional runways, additional terminals, and looking for something different, really. And definitely, my current role as the CSO for digital towers in NATS is very much looking at problems that we have to solve in an operation. And the digital tower is definitely a really key way of solving those issues for ATC, apron operations, and beyond that, actually.
Okay, I mean, Neil, some of us in the industry might look at digital towers and think, well, it's just replacing a traditional control tower with a mast with a load of cameras attached to it. But would you say that it's more than that?
Yeah, absolutely, Ady. That's controllers are used to having a panoramic view out the window of the tower. So that's very often, the first kind of reference point that we need to provide. So, typically we will be providing that as part of the system. But there's a lot of other ATM data involved, especially a big airport like Heathrow. You've got a lot of other data systems there, and you've got the ability to, to integrate some of that data into the system and make it available to controllers in a way that's kind of intuitive, provide the data when they need it and where they need it. So in effect, we can augment the visual view with data labels. We can plug in controller support tools like a departure manager, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been fortunate at Heathrow to have the laboratory developed on the ground floor of the control tower. Could you guys just give us a bit more information as to, what that is and why you developed it, and the kind of stuff, the neat kind of tech kit you've got in there?
Yeah. So one of the key drivers for locating that where it is so that controllers can have access to it. Whenever Searidge are delivering a system, once it goes into operation, the users are the experts, and they're the people that will have to use it going forward. So it's really important that they get to interact with it early. They get to sort of build the system, to meet the needs that they have. So it was really important to put it in there in the first place. We used some 4K cameras and screens, so it's really the latest technology available to provide a really, really high resolution view. And then, of course, there's integration with the ASM GCS system. So, in layman's terms, the surface surveillance system, that radar data is fused into the system, so we can provide all that information, on the display to controllers. And Andy's obviously spent a lot of time developing that system there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've kind of hit some really key points on the head, Neil. From again, going back to that sort of first experience that controllers have, and trying to make the digital tower solution a clear relevance to an operation like at Heathrow, and particularly where you have operational staff who are focused on delivering today's operation, and they are a scarce resource. So enabling them to see what is available, and actually, this isn't, while we have it as a laboratory facility, all of the features are features that are currently available on systems that are deployed around the world, that have been used and are being used operationally. So it means that the controllers can see exactly what the technology is like, what they see with it, and the additional layers of information. So as Neil's mentioned, having the ability to look out of the window at a full panoramic view of the of one of the runways at Heathrow, and actually to see the radar data moving live over the top of that, so that every aircraft is tagged with its identity, inbound, outbound, and parking stands that are on the inbounds. But effectively with as much information as is needed, but it gives you the ability to walk into that room and immediately have a better awareness of what's actually happening in the operation live, than were you to walk into the control tower without then sitting down, taking a handover, and actually looking at some of the other systems that we have, like our electronic flight strips and the like, where you would then have to cross-reference that, because it's all presented directly in front of you. So, regularly we will have visitors to that facility, and you can describe what's happening. You can see as runway changes occur, which is the last departure that's going to go from one runway, and as the traffic's moved around different direction, towed aircraft are clearly labelled and indicated that way. You get an opportunity to see the kind of traffic that's operating in the vicinity of the airfield, but not necessarily landing at Heathrow. So air ambulances, police helicopters, that kind of thing, executive traffic that's departing from the nearby airfield. So that becomes then clearer to the extent that there's now a possibility to just look out of the window and see all of that. You don't have to scan between an airborne surveillance radar, out of the window, down to electronic strips. And just putting that in front of the controllers, I think, then gives us a stepping stone to then immediately go to the next position, really, which could be addition of artificial intelligence, which we've applied to assist the controllers in doing their work. So it's been a very powerful facility for that purpose of developing the solutions to deploy them into the tower, and perhaps to enable us then to take Heathrow expansion.
Yeah, I mean, my own experience of the Heathrow lab, it was just astounding to go in and see the incredible ultra HD images, both from an operating distance, and even I went right up to the screen and stood kind of a nose away from the screen, and the view is amazing. But what was even better was seeing it was an Emirates A380 departing runway 27 right, and as it was climbing away, there's a little data block coming off the aircraft with the call sign, type, level that it's passing, and all of that good stuff, with a police helicopter operating just north of the airfield, which I guess means that I'm spending a lot less time with my head down looking at data on the desk, and I'm looking out the window a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing that with other airports and other ANSPs where perhaps they have more VFR traffic, more visual traffic, more small aircraft operating in the vicinity of the airfield, along with the large aircraft. And it's that high resolution that we're able to operate to in digital towers now, particularly with the 4K technology being very operational ready, and in fact something we've had at Heathrow for 2 years or more. It gives you the capability to be able to monitor circuit traffic and control it in a way that's equally as good as a physical tower, which I think has often been people's worry about systems before, as to whether the resolution is good enough, and it absolutely is. The fact that you can add more cameras and more resolution to that, and then add distributed views, add things like tracking of particular aircraft. So, you can point electronic binoculars now at an aircraft and automatically track that aircraft while you're looking away and doing something else, and then going back to that aircraft that's still being tracked in those binoculars, and you're able to see them at even greater resolution, to the extent that you can now see as the aircraft commences its turns on the circuit that it's flying. So they're the kind of things that on a good day in a physical control tower you can achieve. On a day where the conditions are not so good, and you perhaps have a quite sort of grey or white sky, as is often the case in the UK or in Far East even, and it's very difficult then to see a small white aircraft against that. But having the benefit of the integrated radar data, so you can see labels, so a helicopter head on to you can still be seen, and you have that awareness when it's 4 or 5 miles away from the airfield, but heading straight for you. And likewise, you've got the ability to control that circuit traffic, and even in those worst conditions, use the PTZs to be able to give you that kind of body language. Another of my colleagues kind of refers to it as, where because you get the ability to see the aircraft make those turns, and likewise when they're out on the taxiways, you can see them slowing as they're approaching junctions and the like. It all just adds to the experience and helps the controller with doing the job that they do today, and actually enhances that experience.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, just we'll have a quick look at some of the technology that you're looking at, and there's something which I know that you guys have developed called Amy. What exactly is that?
So Amy is effectively the first use of artificial intelligence in introduced into Searidge systems. So we kind of came up with that name. Obviously, it's got AI within it, but also a lot of the AI devices that people are using have a name, and it's kind of easy to kind of personalize the technology a little bit that way. So Amy, is in the first iteration of what we've been doing at Heathrow, is effectively a tracking and detection system that's learning, how to recognize aircraft, vehicles, and differentiate between them to kind of make support decisions that controllers are making. It can also be applied to voice, and going forward, we're looking at sort of developing, and in fact we are developing, sort of support tools that would aid controllers in making, still making human decisions, but with a system that learns and can learn how to give them the correct advice. So
is that an acronym then? Is that AIM?
Well, Amelia Earhart was
right, okay.
some of the inspiration behind it, and AI is in the name as well. So we can blame one of our colleagues for coming up with that.
Great, we'll stick with that. So I mean, effectively, what I'm hearing is that there is not a one size fits all, Neil. You can have lots of different types of digital tower, and contingency towers, primary towers, hybrid setups.
Yeah, it's really scalable technology, and you alluded to the kind of the initial sort of use case was these small remote airports, but we're now talking to customers about tower replacement, airport expansion. We're doing a remote tower system in the US that is with the FAA that's effectively about bringing ATC into service at that airport. They didn't have ATC before. They don't want to have to build a whole new control tower. So there's a lot more sort of uses for it, and the technology can be deployed at a small airport, but it can scale up to something the size of Singapore, which is over 100 camera sensors, multiple camera masts giving those views. Or we can do it at a small airport, with a single mast and just the views that you need. So there is no, as you say, one size fits all. It's really pretty scalable stuff.
I was saying as well, when you mentioned around the hybrid side of things, I think that's quite an important point as well, because certainly over the years that NATS and Searidge have been working together, we've identified a range really of digital tower models that suit different operations, from the smallest to the largest multi-terminal, multi-runway type. But also in doing so, we certainly spotted that there was a benefit in bringing the digital technology into existing towers and effectively providing a physical digital hybrid, not least of all when we were looking at Heathrow use case and a replacement of our contingency facility there, which effectively is a remote operation but using radar data only. Enhancing that by making it a full remote digital operation. I say remote, not really that remote, because we're looking at it being within the airfield itself, but effectively a full digital facility. But as soon as you start providing those enhanced views for the ground movement controller, for example, or one of 3 ground movement controllers, as soon as you then potentially have the opportunity to add AI support on as well, the obvious question comes, well, if I'm doing that in my contingency, how can I leave my physical control tower without these support tools and without the benefit of enhanced views, brought to the controller from 2 kilometers away, because it's a big surface to cover. So as soon as you're onto that, you're now looking at displaying panoramic views and PTZ views onto controller workstations within a physical tower, and combining a look out of the window with an electronic look out of the window, and that I think is a real key future for many airports.
And Neil, one question that I've just come up with is it possible for all of that data and all of that visual stuff to be stored and maybe replayed for training purposes or safety improvement, lesson learning stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's recorded and archived. So all of the synchronized audio as well as the video is all recorded, and that can be played back. You can play it back in the system. You could integrate it with your simulator system and play it back in there. You could even run, if you're combining a simulator and digital tower facility, you could even run, various training exercises, simulate emergencies, things like that, and also simulate the views of where you would consider placing additional camera sensors.
Right, okay.
We have actually used that record facility on a number of things. So we used it in Heathrow with the AI because it was a way of capturing the 40,000 flights that we had operate in front of the sensors, and that Amy had been trained to detect and provide controllers with alerts and indications over. And we were then able to play back and also assess in very detailed analytics the operational capability. So for us, that then becomes a way of really being able to measure and assure those kind of cutting edge technologies. When you're putting AI into ATC and airport operations when it's never been done before, you're way off the page as far as the rulebook's concerned, and effectively your assurances are pretty much being built around that data set. Likewise, we've used the data sets for training of AI and also for predictive purposes. So again, in the same way that a controller becomes familiar with, in this kind of scenario, in this kind of weather conditions, I would expect the following outcome. In fact, Amy becomes very efficient at predicting those kind of things. And certainly we were demonstrating a capability where Amy was predicting which exit the aircraft would vacate through as it was on short finals, and comparing that with the views of controllers that were valid at that airfield. It wasn't Heathrow, but it was another airfield. And actually, Amy was pretty much placing her bet very accurately ahead of the operational controller. So you know, the capabilities are there, and that's really been useful to have that data archive. Excellent.
2020 has been quite a different year than any of us had ever expected, certainly within aviation. Has that changed how airports view the idea of a digital tower, both of you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I think yes. There's again two sort of parts to that one. In that, I think it's given us new use cases, and I'll let Neil perhaps talk about how the Hungara Control team have been using their facility in response to COVID. But I think the other thing that it's done is it's clearly affected a lot of airports, but those airports and ANSPs that I think are looking as to how the future will affect them are also looking at all sorts of things, from aging infrastructure that needs replacing, to perhaps doing things in a slightly different way, using more support. So actually, we have certainly seen an increase in the amount of traffic that we're getting to us, looking for advice and solutions in those kind of areas. But Neil, as I say, I think the Budapest one's a really interesting use that Hungara Control have come up with.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Andy. So yeah, so Hungara Control decided to use the Budapest digital tower system as part of their COVID response. So they decided to keep operational teams separate to reduce the chance of infection. So for a period, I think for about 3 or 4 months, they were running a day shift from the digital tower and night shift from the traditional tower, and keeping those teams separate. And yeah, I think they ran over 2,000 hours of operation continuously, every day for about 3 or 4 months, which was, a kind of an unintended use case.
Absolutely, yeah.
Obviously it was there for contingency purpose, but
yeah,
that resilience that it provided was really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And Neil, just finally from you, where do you see all this going over the next few years? Do you think that we'll stop building new physical towers altogether?
I think we're coming to a point where airports and NSPs can make a really educated decision whether they feel they need to replace a tower with another traditional tower. Some airports may decide to keep them as an iconic structure, for example, but I think the actual business case is very, very close to being there, if not there already. That if I'm due to replace my tower in 4 or 5 years' time, I should be looking at a digital tower, because the technology is mature enough now. We're starting to see it, obviously, being implemented at many airports across the world. So if it comes to the decision to make, build a kind of expensive concrete and steel structure, they're going to have the option now that any airport in the world would be able to say, I think the risk is low enough that we can now move forward with this technology. It's proven and it's in operation in a lot of places.
I'd agree, and any solution has an element of compromise within it, and a physical control tower is no different to that. So, looking at it from the point of view of if we were starting today as day one on the air traffic control development ladder, I think with the available technology and its maturity, it would be highly unlikely we would come to the solution that we would build a very tall concrete mast and put a team of people in a glass bowl on top of it. I think it would very much be a case of we would put a lot of sensors out on the airfield and bring the information to a team of controllers.
It's been an absolutely brilliant discussion, guys. I've certainly enjoyed it and learned a huge amount about what feels like a major part of the future of airport ATC. But now it's over to the best bit, where we get to grill you on these questions that are flying in. So the first one is from Darren, who's contacted us from the UK Met Office, who says, making weather observations is part of many controllers' work. I'd be interested to learn of the experiences of those working in digital towers to undertake weather observations. Good question. Let's go to Andy first and see you're itching to answer it.
It is. I'm certainly not an expert on meteorological observations. That's not something that in my controlling career I personally did. However, certainly from a NATS perspective, we do carry out meteorological observations, and we have achieved an agreement with regards to being able to do that from a digital tower environment. So yeah, I think I don't think that is a constraint. I think it's another way of getting more data into the system from the point of view of weather observations, and actually being able to provide that information, given that it's on a camera feed. That information can be shared. So it's different to having somebody who's remote looking at an observation, and the information is then just converted to a number of fields, if you actually want to see that information as well directly. Okay.
Neil, I'm sorry, but you're going to get the really difficult one. This is from Paul from the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. So okay. you better get this right. Do you think busy airports would be able to increase declared capacities due to digital towers?
I think, that's a really, really good question. And I think that question's already been asked and is being explored right now at Singapore. And I'll talk about it a little bit, and Andy can talk about it a little bit more, but they call their system a smart tower. So the idea there is that they're looking to see, can we leverage this technology to release some latent capacity from the system? So for example, you could make an argument that if I can determine with better granularity than I can out the window whether a runway is clear, whether aircraft is vacated, could I potentially reduce spacing on final approach? Could I measure some of the wake vortex activity and make sort of dynamic decisions based on what the weather's doing? So Andy, do you want to talk a little bit more about that in Singapore?
Yeah, well, I think in general, capacity is determined by a number of factors. So, there's anything from spacing on the runway, and interleaving departures in mixed mode, or even in segregated, where you have arrivals and departures on separate runways, where you could add the AI support to assist the controllers in decision making. And I think there's other areas where you can maintain a throughput which potentially would otherwise have been impacted. So that's where the Heathrow AI trials were focused, because we were looking at the point when our very tall control tower would go into cloud, and effectively we would then go into VIS2 or tower and cloud procedures, where the controllers have to go head down, use radar data, with a reduced update rate than a direct view out of the window, or the 25 to 30 frames per second that you get from a camera. But in addition to just providing the controllers with the ability to see that, at Heathrow we actually gave that information to Amy, which then processed it and gives the controller just an indication. So in fact, what you're actually doing is removing a need for a controller to scan lots of images or lots of different parts of the airfield, and actually trigger their scan at key points to make a key decision. So that certainly can help with regards to managing workload. And again, workload can become one of those factors that constrains capacity. So I think all of these things added together absolutely could give us additional movements. And then when you're moving into sort of areas on the ground where perhaps there are portions, I think in most major airfields, where it's more difficult to see a certain part of the airfield, and even using ground-based surveillance with radar systems, you can't get the level of granularity to know that an aircraft can push back or can taxi in, because you're waiting for a pilot or a ground crew to follow a condition-based instruction. But actually, with the images brought closer, so the controller has a direct view as if they're sitting right in the middle of the action. That gives them the benefit of being able to provide more rapid instructions. Or alternatively, again, you can have the AI triggering, and certainly, you know, Searidge has been working on that, which I'm sure Neil can come in on, with regards to triggering events around aircraft manoeuvring onto stand and the actual stand turn process, which then can feed into CDM. And you have all sorts of enabling processes that just digital towers, I think, opens the possibility to.
Marvellous. We've got Phil from Airways New Zealand, who's asked, what are the key challenges and benefits in taking digital tower technology to a busy international aerodrome? Neil, let's go for it. Okay.
Well, you know, the technology is actually quite well suited to busy airports with very defined procedures. You know, obviously the aircraft are larger as well than VFR traffic. So, you know, and you've got very specific arrival, departure flows, SIDS and stars, managing the traffic. So it's actually really well suited to that larger environment. You know, we've seen that with, you know, obviously Budapest, you know, pre-COVID was doing in excess of 100,000 movements a year on 2 runways, you know, with no capacity restrictions. The traffic levels at Singapore obviously very, very high, and you know, we were able to go into active, you know, into shadow modes there, where controllers are, you know, effectively monitoring the traffic as if they're controlling it. So, you know, absolutely, and when you add in the other systems that are available to you as well, and the ability to kind of you know, use that information when and where you need it. You know, the visuals are just part of the overall system, and becomes quite sophisticated and quite intuitive to use at, you know, with higher traffic levels.
We've got a cracking question from Peter from Nav Canada. Are controllers working in a digital tower environment still considered as, he calls them VFR controllers under the Canadian system, but I guess that currently I'm an aerodrome controller, and I control by looking out of the window. But if I'm controlling by looking at a screen, albeit a representation of the window, am I still an aerodrome visual controller? How does that work regulatory-wise, Andy?
Well, that is a question that's asked regularly, and the simple answer is that the systems are designed to enable controllers to apply the same procedures as they do from a physical control tower. So the panoramic displays are designed so that you can monitor the positions of aircraft relative to each other and provide reduced visual separations, or to interleave visual flights with instrument flights coming down the final approaches. And again, I think the key to it is making sure that you have sufficient resolution in the displays, and that kind of also links back to the previous question about big airfields. You know, that a system that's suitable for a 1,500-meter runway and perhaps the odd commuter flight is going to be a very different solution to one that fits a 4,000-meter runway or a multi-runway airport, multi-terminal airport. They need to be scaled appropriately to give the controllers the appropriate level of resolution, and then you can provide all of the traditional separations and techniques that we all know and love as controllers.
Great stuff, Susan. Still look out the window. Paul's back from ICAO, I'm afraid, Neil, with another quiz question. Does a digital tower open up the possibility of a more flexible contract for ATC provision? He goes on to say, across border or even different providers for different times of the day.
I don't think the technology is going to be the limiting factor there, to be honest. I think it's probably, you know, more of a kind of sovereignty and political question as to whether the appetite is there to do it. But, you know, in ATC, obviously in en route, people have been operating delegated airspace from other, you know, other FIRs in the past. You know, there are some places around the world where people are operating services cross-border. So yeah, this you know, the technology absolutely enables it. The fact that you don't need to be on that airfield means that you can be, you know, somewhere else, and you're really just relying on suitable network links and the political will to make it happen.
Yeah. Question in from Torsten from Navier, who says, You haven't spoken much on the potential benefits of multiple digital towers. So Andy, how do you see multiple towers evolving? I guess he means more than one digital tower on an airfield.
Yeah, well, I think there's again, there's lots of different ways of applying multiple towers. Going back to the sort of original use cases that I think people were looking at, there was the potential that you would have one controller who would manage a couple of very low traffic airfields. That is definitely a use case. I don't think it's going to be the prime one, given all the other capabilities that you can serve with a digital tower. Otherwise, though, I think potentially the question is in terms of sort of putting multiple airport towers into a single facility, which again is a perfect use case in some environments. So where there are staff in multiple remote locations, for example, putting them into a central location could be very beneficial, particularly if the remote locations are perhaps not the kind of places that people want to be based. You could basically have your centre wherever suits the ability to get those high quality professionals. It's a very specific use case, though. So yeah, you don't have to put digital towers into multiple digital tower facilities, but there's definitely a use case, and we're seeing those in certain places around the world. Likewise, there is no reason to go remote from the airfield. What we're definitely focused on in places like London and Singapore is a digital capability on the airfield or very near to the airfield.
Excellent. Tony asks, is this a step to having a heads-up display on the tower windows? Is that something that's been looked at, Neil?
Yeah, we've been involved. We have a research and development component within the company, and we're always looking at innovative technology. And yeah, we've done some work, with things like Oculus Rift type goggles. We've done some work with, kind of augmenting the view from a controller seat as they look out the window. So effectively, broadcasting this onto the glass. I think one of the issues with that is that it's fine if you're looking at it directly, but if you're looking at it from a side angle, you maybe can't see it. And there's usually, quite a requirement for that shared situational awareness of what's going on. So that might be a little bit niche in some ways, but absolutely, it's the idea of having a video while having video with augmented information overlaid on it is definitely looking at that use, just doing it a slightly different way.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that I think the head-up display really is almost more achieved by the integration of data like overlays, which provide a delineation in darkness or perhaps in snowy conditions, or even reduced visibility. Likewise, having the radar data overlaid, pretty much kind of gives you that sort of heads-up effect, because you're no longer having to look down for that information. It's just presented for you as you're looking out of the electronic windows. But if it's more around the being able to provide that within a physical tower, as I say, certainly that hybrid approach where we're putting that kind of integrated data and video onto displays and putting those onto the controller workstations, but still being able to look out of the window, I think is probably the more likely use, just because of some of the limitations around placing a head up. It works if you're pretty much going to stay in position and you're focused in one particular area, but I'd never say never.
Okay, this is the last question. This is a good one. This is from Chris. Chris is an architect who has designed several towers, so he's obviously quite interested in this subject. He admits to a bias for the physical tower and the identification that it gives to an airport. You certainly recognise Heathrow's tower when you bomb around the M25, it stands out a mile. Does the panel feel that the digital tower totally replaces the need for the visibility that a human eye from a VCR provides? Specifically in terms, he says, of the peripheral vision, and the ability to react to situations that may occur elsewhere on the airfield. So you can both chip into that one as we finish off.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, yeah, I can see physical towers will be around for some time still, not least of all because I think adding digital capabilities to them extends their life, because it gives you the ability to adapt an airfield around the tower without it being further compromised. But I think for me, you know, I would still go back to the fact that the digital capability, you know, means that you can have two controllers sitting alongside each other who are looking at parts of an airfield that could be 4 or 5 kilometers apart, but they're able to talk and coordinate directly with each other, and they're able to see as if they were sitting directly in those areas 4 or 5 kilometers apart. So you suddenly create this kind of virtual floor space which covers the entire airport and brings it towards you. And I think that means that physical towers really need the digital enhancement to, you know, otherwise we're just continuing with you know, cars that don't have any of the gadgets that we've learned to love, you know, on them. So, you know, you expect to have all those extras, and I think the digital tower hybrid solutions now are the extras for controllers of today and tomorrow. And
the last word from you, Neil. Oh, I've been longing to say this. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. We got one in right at the end. Yeah, the scan's a little bit different, you know, in the digital tower, because effectively you're bringing a 360-degree view in without having to turn around as much. You know, I've been up in Heathrow Tower a couple of times, and I've been in towers where, you know, maybe there's a go around and suddenly everybody's looking around, everybody's turning, you know, making sure they have, you know, the full situation awareness. Well, all of that is presented in a video wall to you. So, you know, there's not as much physical having to crane around, move your neck and so on. So it's a little bit different. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to, but I think people adapt to it pretty, very quickly.
Excellent. Well, they made a remote tower work in Die Hard too, so I'm sure we can manage it elsewhere. On that digital bombshell, thanks to Andy, and a big thanks to Neil, and thanks to everybody for watching. I hope you found it as interesting and as fun as I have. That's the end of the second episode of Altitude, but hopefully we'll be back. If you've got any feedback for us or ideas on future topics that you'd like us to cover, please email us in at info@nats.co.uk, and keep an eye on Nats's social media channels for details of episode 3. And if you've all been very good, there might be a Christmas special coming up. From us all at Nats, Merry Christmas to you and your families, and a happy and a peaceful 2021. I hope you can join us next time. Goodbye.